Hello, hello, hello. Happy Tuesday. I hope this finds you well and having a really good week. And I hope you're reading something fantastic as well. So welcome to my 2nd April roundup. I'll add the link to the first roundup in the comments if you haven't seen that yet and you want to go back through. I've got a measly 5 more books to add to the total for April, but plus those I'd read earlier in the month, there's actually 14 books this month, which isn't bad. I'm still really very much on track for spanking the behind of my target of 100 books for this year. I think I've read well over 60 on the way to 70 books already, so doing really well. A little bit smug about it, where I was until till the latter part of April, when I just didn't get through as many as I intended to or I wanted to. But I've got some interesting books to talk to you about in this video, and there might be something here that appeals to you, or if you've read them, it'd be really interesting to know what your thoughts are, and I'll see you in the comments. So the reason I think I'm blaming the fact that I only read 5 books in the second half of April on one particular book, and I got this out of the library and I put it down at one point and I just didn't want to pick it up again. And what I want to start with is a proviso that I understand that sometimes we're going to differ in our opinions on books, and that's absolutely fine. The book is only half the experience, the reader brings the other half. And I firmly believe, you know, it's horses for courses. There's something out there for everybody, and this is not a judgment at all if you really love this book, and if you did, it would be really great to hear. But the book that sort of got me stuck today, or this month, was Femlandia, and this was published in 2021 by Christina Dalcher. You might remember she published Vox, which I also read this month, and I had mixed feelings about that. It was quite a good romp, but I wasn't always clear on what the action was. And you know, on the upside, this particular book, it sort of rectifies that. It's really clear to follow. And the premise is it's a dystopian novel. There's an economic collapse, and Miranda and her daughter are caught in this when her husband decides to sort of bail out, you know, quite literally, and drives his car off a cliff because he can't handle the fact that he knows they're going to lose everything. So the background to Miranda is her mother is actually a cult leader. She started the Femlandia movement, and they have these encampments all across the country where people can go, where women can go, and it's like a shelter, and they'll be protected, and it's a women only society. But Miranda never really bought into that. She was kind of at odds with her mother, to the point where her mother actually adopted another girl about the same age as Miranda called Jen, who became her stepdaughter. And Jen and Wynne go off and you know, run these Femlandia camps, but then it's pronounced that Wynne has died. So anyway, back to the modern day, well, the modern day in this dystopian landscape, Miranda and Emma are running out of options, so they decide to walk to the most local Femlandia camp, because they don't have cars, you know, they don't have the car anymore because it's been taken away. And they reach the camp, and we discover, to begin with, it feels like a bit of a utopia, but we discover that not everything is as it appears. So I you know, there's some really interesting ideas here. I wasn't sure what the overall message was telling me by the end, whether or not that's just because I just, you know, it just wasn't for me. But I did find this a slog, and I think if I'd bought this book, I'd have put it down and I wouldn't have picked it back up again. But I did read it. It sort of goes a bit off course at the end. It all goes a bit crazy. But I think the thing that I found difficult about the book is I could see that the twist coming quite, you know, quite a long way in advance, and that kind of spoilt it a bit for me. And I found the ending too neatly resolved and too easily resolved. I mean, I love dystopian novels where there's a sense of a journey, and this has that at one point, but it just didn't really sit together for me. However, I've looked online, because I like to know if I don't particularly enjoy a book, whether other people have had similar experiences, and there's a lot of love for this book. So if that sounds like something you're going to enjoy, don't let me put you off going out there and reading it. It just didn't work for me. And I think I've also, you know, fallen foul of reading a lot of dystopian fiction recently. As you know, I'm sort of trying to work my way through them. And, you know, so I'm comparing it to the likes of The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which, you know, was was just a really, you know, it's a classic of dystopian fantasy. So it'd be really interesting to know, if you've read this book, what your thoughts are on them, particularly if you really enjoyed it, why you really enjoyed it. As I say, I've got nothing against Christine Dalcher, and as I say, I can see that her books are really popular online, but this just wasn't for me. And I think recently as well, I've been quite spoiled. I kind of know what I'm going to enjoy, so I tend to pick up books that I know I'm going to enjoy, and that way, you know, I'm always going to get something out of it. So because I'm picking up books that are based on a theme, and I'm reading a lot of books about dystopian fiction, I'm not picking up books that I would necessarily normally pick up. So there might be an aspect of that as well, that it just felt like a slog, and I put it down. I didn't want to pick it up, and I even took it back to the library intending to hand it back over, and then decided, no, I'm committed to you guys. I'm going to read it and then share what I think about it. So the second book that I wanted to read is goes from a dystopian future to a sort of a troubling medieval past, and that is The Dance Tree by Kiran Millwood Hargrave. And hopefully I've got an image of this coming up for you. And that was published in 2022. And the premise of that book is it's based during the Strasbourg dancing plague, which is quite a famous historical anomaly of sort of mass hysteria that took place in this city, where you know, one person started dancing, and suddenly there were thousands of people dancing in the streets, and some of them were dancing themselves to death. So as soon as I read that on the back, I was like, no, that's a book I'm going to read. So I read it on my Kindle, and I did enjoy the book. The premise, beyond this plague that's hitting the people of Strasbourg, is around our character called Lisbeth, and she's married. They live on the outskirts of Strasbourg. Her husband has to go off and sort of fight for the rights of their land to keep bees. So he's sort of gone off out of the picture, and his sister has returned, and she was banished to a nunnery under mysterious circumstances. I did sort of guess quite early on what those circumstances were. And then the other main character is Ida. Nefe is the sister that comes back, and Ida is Lisbeth's oldest friend in that area, since she moved there and married her husband, but is also has this history with Nefe as well. And apologies if I'm pronouncing the names wrong, it's just how I've read them in the book. So there's lots of family secrets and revelations that take place. Poor Lisbeth has gone through, she has a history of losing children. She's lost about 12 children, and now she's very heavily pregnant. So she has a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen, about her pregnancy and whether this child's going to survive. And there are some sort of political you know, clashings between Ida's husband and Lisbeth's husband, even though that they get on well. And what was quite interesting as well is there's little snapshots throughout from the point of view of some of the dancers in the Strasbourg plague, and I quite enjoyed that. You know, I kind of wish there'd even been more of that, because I found that element really interesting. So there's some twists and turns there. I found it an enjoyable book, probably 3 out of 5, 3.5, something like that, but I did enjoy it. Although when I came to review it for this video, I did have to remind myself how it ended, which is never a good sign, but I did enjoy it. And my next book again is sort of really different, and this was a bit of a cult classic a few years ago. It was a bit of a TikTok classic, and that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. And those of you who watch this video will know I recently read Lapvona, and I found that quite an interesting premise, but this book is completely different. It was published in 2018, so it's a few years out now, so you may have already read this book. But we have this unnamed narrator who seems to have everything in life. She's well off, she's inherited money, she has lost her parents, which is sad, but she never really had a very good relationship with them, and she lives in a beautiful place. She's very attractive, you know, she doesn't have to worry about money, but she is suffering internally from mental health. So this and the last book and the book before that, actually, I think probably all of these books, well, these first 3 books, you sort of do need to think about the trigger warnings. If there are certain subjects and topics that upset you, these are books that might trigger those. So have a little bit of a look, you know, for yourself about what these books are about. But the unnamed character in this book she decides that what she wants to do is put herself to sleep for a year, using medication that she gets from this crazy psychiatrist that she goes to visit, which I quite like. The character is almost a sense of magic realism, I think, that comes in with that particular character. And she takes a combination of tablets to help her sleep, and she just tries to sleep all the time, and in between that she watches old films on the TV and goes across to the shop opposite her for 2 cups of coffee a day. She has a friend called Reva who is concerned about her, but she's actually quite hostile towards Reva, and for a lot of the book I found the narrator quite unlikable, although the premise is really interesting. It's also framed by the September 11 events, and I kind of wish that had been used a bit more in the ending of the book, but I thought that was a really interesting idea, this sort of sense of sleeping and then waking. It's almost like a metaphor for what happened across the world when those atrocities took place. So I found it quite interesting. You know, there's not many of us haven't thought, oh God, if I could just have go to sleep for a few weeks, or is that just me? So I did find it interesting. I found it an interesting concept. Probably again about 3.5, 4 out of 5 for me, but just a really interesting idea overall. And you know, thinking about this idea of metamorphosis and change and how we can control that, but certainly to me there's a sort of sense of, you know, magic realism here. It's not all feels like it's happening in this world completely. The next book I read, you'll have known I've read the first 3 of these, but that's volume 5 of Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. These are books that follow the relationship between 2 high school boys, Charlie and Nick, who fall in love. Charlie is gay, Nick is bisexual, and we follow their relationship in these books. They're incredibly sweet and touching and lovely. My daughter got me to read these. The 5th volume is actually on its way as well, I think now. I think, you know, these are definitely for young people. These are definitely probably not aimed at a 40-odd-year-old woman reading them, but they are really sweet. And I just wish, as I said in previous videos, that these were available when I was at school. You know, I think there'd have been a lot of people who would have really been grateful to have these as a reading experience. In this particular volume, and we talked about trigger warnings before, they explore eating disorders. So again, if that's something that you know you don't want to read about, then probably best to avoid. But they are really sweet, you know, really quick graphic novels. And as I say, they're so important. It's so important that these books exist for young people. And so, you know, I definitely recommend them, particularly for the young person in your life to read. So the final book, which I've read out of the 5, it probably comes as no surprise to some people, although it's an older book. It's actually from 1998. And I've mentioned before that I love books about cold places, and I did a video recently where I shared 6 of them, and I'll probably do another video at some point because I've got loads. But I read a sort of life writing a memoir, The Death Zone by Matt Dickinson. And this is an Everest story. It's the story of Matt's climb on Everest in 1996, and him and his party are climbing from the North Face. And what's quite interesting is they're actually supporting Brian Blessed as well in his 3rd attempt to reach the summit of Everest. And you probably know I've read a huge amount. I mentioned Into Thin Air recently, and Into Thin Air, the events, the tragedies that unfold in that book happen at the same time that this book is taking place. But whilst in Thin Air they're climbing, Into Thin Air they're climbing the South Face, this is what's happening on the North Face. So 11 people lost their lives that year in Everest, and there was 8 lost on the South Face and 3 lost on the North Face. And it's all about the impact of preparing to climb for Everest and then hearing that this tragedy is taking place and that there are people caught up on the top of Everest, and also their own ambition and drive to reach the summit and the reasons why they want to reach it. I think I'm correct in saying they were aiming to be the first film crew on top of Everest, and that was one of the aims, as well as trying to support Brian Blessed and follow his journey climbing up Everest. So I thought that this was interesting to read another take on those events. I've read several books about those events now, and in terms of life writing, it really captures your interest, it drags you along, but the descriptions of the setting really bring the place to life. So for example, the plume has a compelling hypnotic quality, like the northern lights or ocean waves breaking on a shore. Once you start watching it, it becomes hard to tear the eyes away, so seductively does it shift and reshape with the passing of time. Seen from the plateau, the plume is silent, but, like watching someone scream behind soundproof glass, the mind has no trouble in imagining the sound that must be accompanying it. And there's just some beautiful descriptions of the location, and actually really interesting insights as well, particularly about how dirty and how much rubbish there is on the mountain. I know that's something that they've been working hard to rectify. But if you like mountaineering books like me, if you like books about people reaching Everest, of which I've read, I've not climbed Everest, to make that clear. I did climb Snowdon once. Of all the books I've read so many of these sorts of depictions of events of mountain climbing, in particular Everest, K2, all sorts of places. I think it's just because it's like reading about somewhere completely different. It's somewhere I'm never going to visit, and I'm interested in what compels these people to climb in such a hostile environment that's so different from anything else. So I enjoyed that, and I've actually ordered, or I'm going to order, another Everest book to read at some point in the future as well. But those are my books for April. As I say, I will include the link to my first April roundup, in which I talk about 9 books that I'd read in that time period. I'm hoping to get through a few more this month. I'm actually reading Beloved by Toni Morrison at the moment. I thought I'd really need to read something really excellent, and it's one of those ones I've meant to read but never got round to. So hopefully I'll be telling you a bit about that as well. And don't forget to tune in to find out what my book of the month was for April too. But thank you very much for your time. If you're new to this channel, do subscribe to hear more recommendations and follow me on my journey to read 100 books in 2023. As you can see, I read a wide range of books. I read new releases, but I also read some older stuff as well. And I share recommendations of books that I've read that I've got in my copious shelves of books, and also book hauls and all of that good stuff. So if you do want to come along, do like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.